In the heart of Beverly Hills, just 2 blocks from Rodeo Drive, stood a restaurant called Le Jardin. Known for its crystal chandeliers, Italian marble floors, and Michelin-starred chef, this establishment was a haven for Hollywood's elite. But that Tuesday afternoon, the woman who walked through the doors of this luxury restaurant didn't look like she belonged. Diane Keaton stepped inside, wearing faded blue jeans, a white cotton blouse, and the comfortable brown leather shoes she'd worn for years. There was no makeup on her face, and she carried only a small linen bag. When the restaurant staff looked at her, they thought she must have wandered into the wrong place. But what nobody knew was that this ordinary-looking woman was an Oscar-winning legend, and the man quietly eating his steak at a corner table was Clint Eastwood. What would unfold in the next 10 minutes would become a lesson that everyone present would never forget. As Diane approached the reception desk, the young host standing there looked her up and down. This 26-year-old man named Brandon was one of the restaurant's most arrogant employees. He'd come here to gain experience because his family was wealthy, but he'd never developed a genuine sense of service. In his mind, people who could afford to eat at this restaurant had to meet certain standards: expensive clothes, designer bags, luxury cars. When he looked at Diane, he saw none of that. He spoke with a vague smile on his face, his voice polite, but carrying clear condescension underneath. "Hello, may I help you?" he said, though his tone made it clear he wanted to turn her away, rather than help. Diane responded with that calm demeanor she'd grown accustomed to. "Yes, I'd like a table, please." Brandon spoke without even glancing at his reservation book. "Do you have a reservation?" Diane shook her head. "No, but I thought perhaps there might be an open table." A mocking smile appeared on Brandon's lips. "Unfortunately, we don't accept walk-ins, especially during lunch hours." But the truth was, only 3 tables were occupied in the restaurant, and at least 10 remained empty. Diane noticed this but didn't say anything harsh. She simply asked politely, "I understand, but it appears there are empty tables." "I'll only be staying for about an hour. Would that be a problem?" Brandon became irritated by her persistence. His voice rose slightly as he continued. "Ma'am, we have certain standards here. Our clientele generally fits a different profile. Perhaps the cafe down the street would be more suitable for you." These words were a clear insult. A flash of surprise crossed Diane's face, but she quickly composed herself. She was a woman who had faced countless rejections in Hollywood over the years, but had never lost her dignity. Still, encountering such blatant prejudice stung deeply. Just as she was about to respond, a deep voice rose from the back corner of the restaurant. A voice that immediately straightened Brandon's shoulders. "Young man, the lady clearly asked for a table. And I can clearly see empty tables around me. Why are you making this so difficult?" Clint Eastwood sat at his corner table. In front of him was a half-finished steak. Beside him, a glass of red wine. He had turned to Brandon with those familiar, gravelly eyes, and every word carried a calm but sharp warning. When Brandon saw Clint, his face went pale. Clint Eastwood was one of this restaurant's most valued customers. He came at least twice a week, quietly ate his meal, left generous tips, and never caused any trouble. But now, this legendary actor was defending a woman who had just walked in. Brandon stammered, trying to respond. "Mr. Eastwood, I was just trying to enforce our restaurant policy." Clint leaned back in his chair, slowly folded his napkin, and spoke, his voice now sharper. "Your policy? Or your personal prejudices? Because I've been eating here for years, and I've never seen anyone turned away because of their clothes." Brandon didn't know what to say. Diane watched this exchange in astonishment. She recognized Clint, of course, but she never expected him to intervene on her behalf. Clint stood up and walked slowly toward the reception desk. He was over 90, but his posture was as upright and commanding as the cowboys he'd once played in films. He stopped in front of Brandon, looked directly into his eyes, and spoke. "This lady was making films that would change the world when you were still in diapers. But you wouldn't know that because you only look at appearances. Now you're going to show her to a proper table, or would you prefer I call the restaurant manager?" Sweat appeared on Brandon's forehead. Just then, the restaurant manager Maurice emerged from his office. A man in his 60s who spoke with a French accent and had managed the restaurant for 30 years. The moment he grasped the situation, he asked in a voice that was stern but controlled, "Brandon, what's going on here?" Clint turned to Maurice and calmly explained, "Maurice, this lady came here to have a meal. But your young employee here is trying to turn her away because her clothes aren't appropriate." Morris looked at Diane, and for a moment surprise flickered in his eyes. Then he smiled. A genuine smile. "Ms. Keaton, seeing you here is a great honor. Please forgive me. This is completely unacceptable." Diane smiled graciously. "It's all right, Maurice. I understand." Maurice turned to Brandon, his voice now more serious. "Brandon, my office. Now." Then he turned back to Diane and spoke politely. "Ms. Keaton, please follow me. I'll give you our best table." As Diane walked behind Maurice, she turned toward Clint, and their eyes met. Clint nodded his head slightly, a gesture of respect. Diane returned it the same way, gratitude evident in her eyes. Maurice led Diane to the finest table by the window, overlooking the heart of Los Angeles. Then he offered a sincere apology. "Ms. Keaton, Brandon's behavior was completely wrong. In this restaurant, everyone should be treated equally. Today's meal is on us. Please accept." Diane raised her hand and spoke. "Maurice, that's not necessary. I just wanted to have a quiet lunch." Maurice insisted. "No, ma'am. This is my responsibility. And if you'll allow me, let me prepare something special from our chef's menu." Diane accepted with a smile. After Maurice left, Diane looked toward the corner table. Clint had sat back down and resumed his meal, as if nothing had happened. But Diane knew how important what he'd done really was. The other customers in the restaurant had watched it all unfold. "A couple," the woman whispered to her husband. "Wasn't that Diane Keaton? My God, the host didn't recognize her?" The man replied. "And Clint Eastwood came to her defense. This is incredible." Meanwhile, Brandon was sweating in Maurice's office. Maurice sat at his desk, hands clasped, staring at Brandon. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but every word cut like a knife. "Brandon, when I gave you this job, I thought you deserved a chance. But what I saw today tells me you're not suited for this work. Working here isn't just about serving wealthy customers, it's about showing respect to every customer." Brandon tried to defend himself. "But Mr. Maurice, I was only trying to protect the restaurant's image." Maurice slammed his hand on the desk, his voice rising. "Image? What you did wasn't protecting our image, it was tarnishing it. Diane Keaton is one of Hollywood's most respected names, and you insulted her because she was wearing jeans. This is unacceptable." Brandon was genuinely frightened now. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." Maurice took a deep breath. "Brandon, I'm not firing you, because everyone can make mistakes, but from now on, you'll work in the kitchen. And every day washing dishes, you'll learn humility. If after 6 months you show me you've truly changed, maybe I'll give you another chance." Brandon lowered his head. He was ashamed, but at the same time he was beginning to understand something. As Diane ate her meal, she was lost in thought. She remembered years ago, facing similar situations. She'd lost certain roles because she wasn't young and beautiful enough. But she'd never given up. And now, years later, facing prejudice again, there was one difference. This time, she wasn't alone. After finishing her meal, Diane paid her bill and thanked Maurice graciously. Then she stood and walked toward Clint's table. Clint immediately stood when he saw her, displaying that old-school courtesy. Diane spoke with a genuine smile. "Mr. Eastwood, I wanted to thank you for what you did today. You didn't have to intervene on my behalf." Clint shrugged with that familiar, humble manner. "Ms. Keaton, I only did what was right. Years ago, something similar happened to me, I'd just come from a cowboy film, walked into a hotel wearing my cowboy boots. The man at the desk told me, "This place isn't for your kind." I've never forgotten that day. And since then, I can't stay silent when I see these situations. They chatted for a few more minutes, discussing old films, new projects, and life's strange turns. Diane was impressed by Clint's calmness, his wisdom. Clint admired Diane's resilience and the unwavering strength of her dignity. At the end of their conversation, they said goodbye, and Diane left the restaurant. When Maurice emerged from his office and came back inside, Clint was still sitting at his table. Maurice approached and spoke with respect. "Mr. Eastwood, what you did today, it was truly meaningful." Clint looked at Maurice and replied calmly, "Maurice, I only did what was right. But the one who deserves praise is you. You gave Brandon a second chance, because you know that people can change." Maurice bowed his head with a grateful smile. "Thank you, sir. And Ms. Keaton? What a gracious woman. She even forgave Brandon for what happened." Clint smiled slightly. "That's exactly why I defended her, Maurice. Because kind people deserve to be protected in this world." That evening, when Diane returned home, her phone rang. The caller was Sarah, an old actress friend. Sarah spoke excitedly. "Diane, I heard. Clint Eastwood defended you at Le Jardin today. Everyone's talking about it on social media." Diane was surprised. "What? What do you mean?" Sarah explained. "Someone at the restaurant secretly recorded what happened. The video went viral. People are flooding both you and Clint with support. And that host, Brandon, everyone's criticizing him." Diane took a deep breath, her voice shifting with concern. "Oh, that poor boy. I hope this doesn't hurt him too badly," Sarah asked in astonishment. "Diane, he insulted you and you're still worried about him." Diane replied, "Sarah, he's young and ignorant, but today he learned a lesson, and I hope that lesson makes him a better person. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we correct them and what we learn from those mistakes. If I don't forgive him, how can he forgive himself?" Sarah was silent for a moment, then spoke in a softer tone. "Diane, you've always had such a big heart. That's why I love you, and that's why you're one of Hollywood's most precious people." A week later, Brandon was still working in the kitchen, but now he felt like a different person. With every dish he washed, he was learning something: humility, patience, empathy. Every plate taught him a lesson. One day, Maurice came and spoke in a serious but kind tone. "Brandon, today I'm putting you back at the reception desk. But remember, if you make this same mistake again, there won't be forgiveness this time." Brandon replied gratefully, his voice determined. "Mr. Maurice, I promise, I will never make a mistake like that again. This week taught me so much, and now I know that every person has a story." That day, while working at reception, a woman walked in. Torn jeans, an old t-shirt, and worn sneakers. Brandon hesitated for a moment. His heart raced, remembering last week's mistake. But then he took a deep breath and greeted her with a smile. "Welcome. How may I help you?" The woman looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected such a warm reception. "Do you have a table available?" Brandon replied kindly and genuinely. "Of course, ma'am. Let me show you to our finest table. The view by the window is magnificent." When the woman sat down, she looked at Brandon with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you. I didn't expect to be welcomed like this here. Usually people judge me based on my clothes." Brandon spoke with a sincere expression, his voice genuine. "Ma'am, everyone is welcomed equally here, because I've learned that a person's worth isn't in their clothes, it's in their heart. Please relax and take a look at the menu." The woman smiled, and Brandon felt a warmth inside. Perhaps he truly had changed. A few months later, Diane and Clint ran into each other at a charity event. Both were supporting a fund that provided scholarships to young actors. During the event, Diane approached Clint and asked with curiosity, "Mr. Eastwood, I've been wondering since that day. How is Brandon doing? Clint smiled, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. I spoke with Maurice. Brandon has changed. He's become a better person now. Your understanding really inspired him. In fact, last week Maurice told me something. Brandon now treats every customer with the same warmth. Diane nodded with satisfaction, her voice emotional. Clint, what you did that day was more than just defending me. You taught Brandon a lesson too. And that lesson, it may have changed his life. Who knows how many people he'll treat with respect from now on. Clint responded with a humble expression, his voice calm, but meaningful. Diane, I only held up a mirror. The real change was already inside him. It just needed to be awakened. Sometimes people need someone else to help them see themselves. When the event ended, Diane and Clint walked outside. The lights of Los Angeles sparkled around them, the city never sleeping. Diane took a deep breath and spoke, her voice thoughtful and wise. Clint, we've been in Hollywood for years, but what really matters isn't how famous we are, it's how human we remain. Because in the end, performances on screen are forgotten, but what we do for people, that lasts forever. Clint nodded, deep understanding in his eyes. You're right, Diane. Because in the end, this is what will be remembered. How we treated people. Our films will one day be forgotten, but the respect we show to someone that will live forever in that person's life. They shook hands and parted ways. But that evening, they both felt the same thing. Perhaps their greatest achievements weren't their performances on screen, but their humanity in real life. 2 years later, when people talked about Le Jardin, they didn't remember the Michelin stars or the crystal chandeliers. They remembered the day two legends reminded everyone that respect costs nothing, but its value is priceless. And somewhere in that restaurant, a young man named Brandon still works the reception desk, treating every person who walks through that door like they matter, because they do.